I'd like to kickstart Awaaz 2013. So we will be starting with a panel discussion in which given our theme is suffering, surviving, and living. In this panel discussion, we'd like to think about what are the dilemmas that we have when we are thinking of such a theme itself, right? And so we have invited a set of people whom we think can speak from very different perspectives about this and tell us something more than how we have usually conceptualized. So I'd like to invite our panelists to the dais. Pratiksha Sharma, Anmol Tiku, Amit Sen. We are waiting for one more panelist, Roma Bhagat, but she'll be here shortly, and of course our chair Ashok Nagpal. So I would like to introduce them, and I would like to say that it was really difficult. It was really difficult to try and figure out how to introduce something that is people who wear so many hats and who have so many facets to the work that they do and the things that they're really telling us, that this was extremely difficult. I've spent hours on this. So Pratiksha Sharma, who goes by the name Sabha Pratiksha, does qualitative research in both health psychology and music therapy. Being a musician, she is interested in how musical identity is psychologically constituted and transformed, especially since she has seen the therapeutic role of music in her own life in a long stint with bipolar disorder. Her research at present is committed to understanding the social roots of mental illness in individuals and to assist their recovery and rehabilitation. So here is Sabha Pratiksha, dog woman, concert artist, accidental non-profit organization head, quantitative researcher, and teacher of classical music. Anmol Tiku, a wanderer and a wanderer. He's been constantly moving between landscapes and mindscapes, from life at sea with the community of fisherfolk off the Alaskan coast to behind the eye of the camera in the film industry in Mumbai and Delhi. For the last 4 years, he's been talking with high schoolers about health, environment and development and sharing all this with his mentor-in-chief, his brother Ashish, who had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia for the past 15 years and must know all too well the bewilderment inherent in navigating the world around us. Dr. Amit Sen is a psychiatrist who specially works in child and adolescent psychiatry. He has been instrumental in conceptualizing and working of Children First, which works with children and families in the area of child and adolescent psychology and psychiatry, including assessment, remedial education, and professional training in this sector. Amit Sen has also been working for the past 10 years now with the Salam Balak Trust, an organization that works with street and working children. It is in working with children that his own childhood dreams and aspirations of being a footballer, rock musician, and if I may say so, even bus driver, have all come together. And
you should also introduce Roma. So it doesn't mean she joins.
Roma Bhagat has been a practicing advocate for 30 years, concentrating on litigation and documentation in the areas of disability and land. Separately, she has been working with disabled persons for 2 decades, especially with people living with deafness, mental illness, and intellectual disability in a wide variety of ways, from policy, legal aid, and litigation to advocacy and judicial training. Her work is geared towards working with the different communicational contexts of persons considered by us to be living with disability. Moreover, she says, it's not enough to empower people as a group or a community. We also have to show them their individual possibilities. I'm hoping that she said that she will be here in another 5 minutes.
We can applaud her. Savor the participation of people.
And all of us, of course, know Professor Ashok Nagpal,
Notorious.
psychoanalyst, teacher, and dreamer.
Just 2 or 3 words. A diverse group that I can see here is a welcome sight for me, and I'm sure for the panelists. Many amongst us are yet not unnerved by the frame that comes to one's life, but we have some of us who are very famous here in terms of various images that are likely to crop up here. I would also like to introduce from amongst the audience here, if I had known, I would have really invited Dr. Kusum Prabhu, a Jungian analyst from Bangalore who happens to be here in Delhi, so decided to walk in without seeking our permission. So we have to apologize on her behalf. She's here, but I'm sure she'll participate as and when we can sort of stimulate her. We have Dimple sitting here, Jogen sitting here, 2 people with enormous activist experience and thinking that goes, which is a prelude to writing. So I think a very evocative presence of these 2. I don't know how to mention Sumati, our registrar sitting here, who always arranges finances these days, and more than finances, I think she makes it easier for us to have a smile around administration. So her presence is also welcome. This is a way to look at the event mental health, which is not an easy conceptualization. I think it has become too trite, too unthought. So when we say mental health, the first connotation is of mental illness. That's the kind of collapse that the term suffers from. And I think the effort of the panel, along with the mime, was precisely this, that how we can be so lost in what we want that it doesn't matter to us what is the name that is given to it. So let's hope that in this panel and through this event, we reach some further expression and understanding of how to catch, grasp this elusive but very vitally needed term health as it belongs to mind and also to relationships. I now invite I ask for a certain bodily presence. So even if your mind is somewhat clogged, let the hands feel a little free. They should only come and meet each other rather than other spaces. Okay? So I'll ask Diksha ji to begin. And each panelist has about 15 to 20 minutes in which they would like to express and also sense when the audience is zooming in closely so that they can take the time, depending on if the audience zooms closely, they can even extend it. If they feel the audience is collapsing, leave it to others to try to do something else. It's a very young audience, so I sometimes worry about their focus, their attention, and I would particularly welcome that we spend more time in receiving questions, which are only part notes for many of the panels. They must have used over these number of times. So Pratiksha, please.
Hi, yesterday I had a very interesting talk in which I was actually talking about how I use music for my own recovery, as a health resource. And being a musician, I use a lot of music, so classical music, violin, So I was given a diagnosis of bipolar disorder when I was in third year college, and it was a particularly bad case of bipolar psychosis, and everything was there. So 18 years I have been on psychiatric medication, and I stopped in 2010 actually, from 1992 till 2010, 18 years. I was very compliant, very disciplined, not missing, except for a little stint in 2005 when I wanted to not take any more medication. I just went cold turkey and I said, okay, it's all over. It doesn't help. So at that time, I was planning to go to the US and I did a GRE. I had a very good score I had. So I couldn't go after. I had a full-blown mania and so on and so forth. Anyway, so I stopped in 2010 and that is when I switched over to homeopathy. And music was always going on in my life, so I was learning music from the age of 9 or 10 years. And so what happened when I now work in research in mental health, particularly, and psychology I say, but particularly within mental health, because this is one field which is very close to my heart. And I decided to write my own story down because it had many markers in it which would share the story of my suffering and then subsequent recovery. Because recovery is not a very easily attained thing in mental illness, especially when it becomes as chronic as over 10 years. So how did that happen and what was the pathways, what role music played? I started living alone. I just had a life with dogs, and one of the reasons for recovery was that. So, and that was the start of my journey towards also documenting the whole thing and what should be the format. So I was very fortunate that I would say, marked by Girishwar Mishra, Professor Mishra of Delhi University, and he became my mentor in a very serious way. And in fact, long back, he encountered me in a certain conference in psychiatry, and we just connected and so on and so forth. And he said, why don't you do something in a more organized way and have an NGO, at least your work would get under one umbrella. It should get all together, and then you can share whatever you're doing, not only about yourself, because I work so much in music also. And I founded the Hansadhwani Foundation. That's the NGO that I'm the head of, and thank you. Hansadhwani, the idea was to work using the arts in health and education, and I thought it's not just people who are mentally ill who need music and art, but I think whole society does. So why not be a mediator and an interpreter of the arts in such a way that you form a kind of a bridge between people and their soul side. I see it like the soul side. And of course in psychology, or perhaps all of you would know, there's also a tradition of depth psychology, which Kusum would be also a very good person to speak on. It is informed by the Jungian tradition, the analytical psychology. I was also again very fortunate to have a Jungian analyst in Rashna in Hasley, and she was my analyst from about 2003 onwards for about maybe the next 10 years, or maybe less than that, whatever. But we met in a very erratic way, once a year, twice in a year. So psychotherapy, psychiatry, etc. doesn't work, really. I mean, for me, as far as I'm concerned. Music work, dogs work, labor work, my own labor, and people, I mean, I'd love to tell you people to bust the myth that you might be thinking that you can take care of the mental health of other people, but really you need to examine your own first of all, And unless you can do that, unless you can actually dive into yourself and see where what is mental health and why is somebody getting the label? What is the distress which is causing this breakdown, and it's getting amplified to the extent that people are now, they reach the level of dysfunctionality. So there is actually distress which is being, so okay, let me just tell you what all I do, because I don't know how to begin. I thought I'll be the last person to speak, but I'll be the first. So it is not based on what others are talking, I will talk. So, because I would love to bust some of the myths about mental health, about recovery, the difference between psychiatry, non-psychiatry. Of course, there's a whole anti-psychiatry debate which is not very rampant in India yet, but yes, it's picking up here also. So whether it works, okay, so in the last 1 year, I wrote some 4 journal papers and 1 book. My book is a qualitative research in mental health. It's called, it's being reviewed by the publisher, and they have done the internal review, and we're the next stage of review. External reviewers. So the book is chronicling the story of 13 people, and those 13 people I have picked up randomly from all over India, because as it is, mental illness is such a serious thing that people are not easily available. So, how to get those people who are willing to speak about themselves and get, documented in a document. So, I use the internet to access those people, to reach out to them and meet them and interact with them, record their stories, transcribe the stories, and analyze the stories. I look at the social construction of madness. What is the reason that people are having those breakdowns? What are the social situations as a result of which this kind of thing is happening in the person? What kind of interaction is happening in the family? What is happening within school? What is happening within marriages? What is happening wherever it is happening? Because people are having these breakdowns everywhere, irrespective of what kind of family you're coming from. So I'm looking at the social dimensions, the psychosocial thing. I'm not looking at the clinical dimension, because clinical psychology, the clinical perspective says there is a problem inside you, it's a lack of something, and we can supply it from outside. That's the clinical perspective. Whereas the social perspective says man is a social animal, and whatever is happening in the human mind is an outcome of the social milieu. The society is acting at the site of the individual to make that person behave in a certain manner. I'm interested in that social construction. So I've been through the whole clinical dimension of it personally myself, and I've seen psychiatry, I've been a very big bhakta of psychiatry. I have believed in it so ardently, you wouldn't believe that. Because 18 years of taking something and believing, it must be coming from some belief, right? For you people, it's a theoretical thing, 18 years. But if you just try to spend 18 weeks in any illness, or months, and years is completely, difficult. It's a whole generation. My youth is lost in those. I've written that in my book. I lost everything in life actually because of the so-called mental illness, and I believe that psychiatry is going to get me somewhere, but it didn't. So all that I'm trying to say is that anyway, whatever happened, ultimately I was very tenacious, I was very inquisitive, I was very knowledge-oriented also. I said I have to find a way out. And today in the morning, I was thinking, what is the two jokes I'll tell you about psychiatry later. This is occurred to me. So then the thing is that within the context of qualitative research, there's a thing called autoethnography, in which what ethnography is, huh? So auto means when you're looking at yourself, and there's a thing called participant observation, which you all know, but autoethnography is the heightening of that to the extent that you're the subject and you're the scholar, you are the person who's analyzing your own story. So I am primarily an autoethnographer. So when I look at mental illness, I'm not looking at like an outsider like perhaps any of you would look at. You look at it like I would see it. So when I talk to people now, as a researcher or as anybody, you would not believe when someone talks to me about psychosis, the way I would see the so-called psychosis is a very different way from how you would look at it. And then therefore, what I will hear, what side of it I will get to hear is completely different. And in fact, this is what I've written down. I am going to peel off so many layers. I will reach down to something very deep down, very deep anguish which people are not able to speak about publicly or openly or in front of somebody who they are meeting in the course of their, let's say, clinical interaction. So the whole perspective is different. People have told me, ma'am, I've been to, somebody said I've been to an analyst or a psychologist in the US also, or I've been to this person in Nimhans or Nimhans or XYZ, all kinds of experiences. Nobody ever asks us the questions that you're asking. Because why am I asking those questions? Because I'm seeing it from my own perspective. Where did my pain come from? So what is it that happened in their life also? Where does it go and stop? Where does it start? What is the point of genesis? So I'm looking at a lot of other things. I'm looking at language which is spoken in the families. I'm looking at the patterns of dominance which are occurring in families and how they impact the individual mind. I'm hand-holding a lot of people, you know. I am hand-holding a lot of people who are going through very serious crises right now also. And I do that all the time. And I cannot even say, hey, you can't pay me X amount of money, it doesn't work for me, sorry. मेरे लिए नहीं है ऐसा, you know. Everything works for me because I have seen the suffering of myself, of my family, of my parents, of everybody. So my perspective is not just I remember the once I was speaking in the Schizophrenia Awareness Association in Pune, and they said there are people who survive and there are people who thrive. So I hope that I would be one of those people who can thrive and hold many others. It would be a ray of hope to them that recovery is a possibility. Let's find a way to create that net of resources for everybody individually. It cannot be like a en masse and you create sources. I need to identify, okay, this is going to work for this person, this is not going to work. Let's say music will work for somebody, some kind of cooking will work for somebody. Okay, interaction with your father is being damaging, so let's try to minimize that. Let's not make it a big thing right now. Let's look at your father like this. Let's look at your aunt like this, your so-and-so like this. We need to, I would say, the word I use is narrative is what I'm focusing on, narrative restructuring, you know. You change the focus of what you're emphasizing on. Perhaps a lot of counseling is that, but I'm looking at more of a collaborative approach, you know. So work that I do is a lot of writing, a lot of hand-holding, and of course a lot of music also. But I don't work with music with people as such right now because it's a very specialized level at which I do my own music. So watering it down to that level is not so easy for me. But this is more or less about what I would like to say. And I think hopefully when people ask me more things about my recovery or what, let's take it up from there. Because I know that to recover, okay, so why research? I call myself a survivor researcher. This is a very well-known thing in the disability research area. People who know disability research will know that. And when I recovered and I decided to write my autoethnography, which had to be my PhD, and thanks to the openness we have in India, I was not given that admission anywhere in university to do that PhD. Girishwar Mishra was willing to be my guide. And now my work is reviewed by some of the best people, I think Girishwar Mishra, Ramakant, Avnihotri, and Ajit Dalal. So these are the people who review my work. Because I also want to be a very good level of academic and whatever engagement it is, not just superficially. So why should I be a researcher and what do I need to research on? So I said, is my recovery a chance? Is it a random thing which can only happen with one person? Am I so special or is there more to it? So if I can deconstruct my own story, can I also do the same with other people? So that is where this whole book began actually, to look at other people and see whether this is not a possibility with them also. And it's a very fascinating thing what the work that I've done. Of course, the anguish of working alone in my own home without even 5 rupees of funding from anywhere, nothing. I had no resources. My family has been very supportive. They've paid all my bills for years and years, you know. But that's how it is. So I still work alone. It's a very painful experience of being alone by yourself, and I think sometimes that I'm in the exact situation which would actually cause a mental illness to anybody. You know? And then I found the answer that actually mental illness doesn't occur if you're sitting alone. You know? You may become alone because of certain setbacks that you get from society. But when you're alone, what happens is that the daily struggle of being alive and to, you know, take care of the bills, the household, in my case dogs, somebody might have something else. There is such a huge lot of struggle in the course of daily living that it's very difficult to be mentally alone if you're ill. To be mentally ill if you're alone. So, although a reason, mental illness is happening when people are interacting with each other. It's not happening to anybody who's alone. So I said, I'm living in the perfect conditions for mental illness. Technically, I should be having breakdowns all the time. But I'm not having it. So what is happening? This is my 2 penny bit on this whole thing, you know. And I think we roll with the punches as and when they come. So, over to you. Thank you.
Her name, as you remember, is Pratiksha. So she's asking us to wait about the punches. Thank you very much. I think you really put in the radical point here. If we interact, there is a danger that we earn enemies.
And the labels.
This is a little bit odd for me because I have never spoken about this in public before, and I'm just actually coming from the psychiatric ward at Ames, where I've been staying with my brother for the last 5 weeks. So I'm a little disoriented and haven't had any time to put any kind of work in. So if I'm not coherent, please just bear with me, and I think the Q&A might sort that out. I think taking from where Sabha has left us, the key thing I would like to stress in the beginning is just the sheer heterogeneity of experience within the psychosocial disability spectrum of what we would call like mental illness, which is true for also what we would call mental health, like people in this kind of different states of mind that people in this room occupy at this moment are going to be staggeringly diverse, and all of you, I presume, will identify yourself as being mentally, healthy. In my grandiose moments, I like to think of this as metaphysical wellness, as in conjunction with physical wellness. So there's a huge spectrum at work here. So and this holds, true for caregivers themselves. My mother's takeaway from her experience as a primary caregiver for my brother, who was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia when he was 18, which is 15 years ago. And my takeaway, we have seen the same things, but is completely radically different. The predominant narrative, which she has to kind of deal with, is that of failure, loss of potential. My brother was a very, very high-performing student and just, an amazing person. And, he is still, but that's very hard to see right now for her because there's 15 years of bitterness and exhaustion and just trying everything and not being able to reach out to him, And my takeaway right now, it's just absolutely true for me that my brother's diagnosis and the life after that radically altered me. I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for that experience that he underwent and is undergoing. And it has actually opened up a different possibility of life altogether for me. To put it concretely, when I was in college, having seen my brother not go to college, not lead a life that would be described as functional, really kind of freed me up. I said, these things don't really matter. Grades, what's that? If these things don't matter for my brother, and I still respect and love him. So certainly these things shouldn't really hold me down, and that really opened up the world to me. I could go and work with my hands, become a janitor, become a fisherman, become a construction worker in the Arctic, do all sorts of things. And that really still holds true as I'm living with my brother in the psychiatric ward. I have made the choice of not actually having a steady job, only working when we need the money, and otherwise, just leading a kind of actually pretty laid back, easy life, where most of my time is spent hanging out with the person that I love the most. That within my family, there's such a huge diversity of takeaways. So I just want to keep that heterogeneity as really central, because what that means is that what I am actually saying to you right now, is a very kind of tentative, tenuous thing, which I have, come up with at the spur of the moment. if you had asked me this question maybe a few years ago, my response would have been very, very different. And if you ask me this question maybe a few years from now, my response might be different. I personally hate wishy-washiness and like hate giving disclaimers, but I think in this case, this disclaimer about heterogeneity and that one size does not fit all is vital, because it has certain sort of epistemological implications about how we negotiate with phenomena as phenomena such as psychosocial disabilities and so on, which is that psychiatric or psychological certitudes are at best guidelines, and when we are dealing with particularly metaphysical self, we are dealing with an immense degree of unknowing, and that knowledge that we actually do not know most of the times what we are doing is central to any sort of meaningful engagement with this. To put it practically, again, just through the story of our lives, my brother, he was put on psychiatric, he was put on psychiatric drugs in 1998. He was fully compliant for maybe 12, 13 years. The entire mode in which we were dealing with that experience was one of management, which is to say that you give the drugs, you try not to harm the person, but you're basically saying life is pretty much not going to be the same, but also that you're never going to engage with the world in any sort of really meaningful way, So that path of management, where people feel they already have arrived at certain sort of conclusions, really basically meant that we are at a place right now that where we can't really say what the disability is due to maybe the illness component of it, and what the disability is just because of the kind of desocialization that he has gone through and the entire stunting effect of it on him, So when you acknowledge the heterogeneity in psychosocial disability spectrum, or within mental health or metaphysical wellness, what it allows us to do, I think, is to acknowledge that our basic focus has to be that of engagement, shift from the vocabulary of management to a vocabulary of engagement. So this is what we have been trying to do in the last year, and within engagement, I think right now we're coming up with certain sort of challenges, because one approach of engagement has been let's support him psychologically, but in the sense of causing him the least harm. So we all know that high expressed emotions can cause relapses or can be difficult for people to handle. So let's basically maybe keep him out of the house for 8 hours in the day. This is what one of his doctors said, that we know that less than 5 hours of expressed emotion, high expressed emotion, is not known to have any sort of significant effect on somebody's health. So I am not really. This approach again doesn't make any sense to me, because this harm reduction approach is again kind of setting limits as to what a recovery or what one's mental health or mental wellness can look like. So right now we are trying to basically keep all options on the table, try to engage with him, try to see what are the things that we can do for best outcomes, which is like familial support, psychological support, psychiatric support, and to see, what works for him. Because as Sabha was saying, the most critical thing really is the person's involvement in their own wellness. Nobody can give you wellness. It's something that the person has to be involved in and has to take charge of. In the case of my brother, that's really, really difficult. I want to kind of just not have this be an entire kind of psychiatry bashing session. I'm sure Dr. Amit Sen is also there to handle that force, but my brother right now is suffering from, the diagnosis is of FTD, which is formal thought disorder, when you lose the ability to communicate in language itself. So once you lose that ability in some sort of way, even if it's temporary, how do you engage with that person? Okay, what if the person doesn't listen to music or does not want to be with anyone else? And this, I've tried this because I was at home for a year, and my brother put his medicines, so I said, okay, that's fine, that's a choice. He stopped eating. I said, that's fine, I'm going to wait, I'm going to persuade you, I'm going to try to keep options for you, all sorts of things. He ate 6 days later, which was kind of tense for the entire family. A family member not consuming water for 6 days, it's not an easy thing to kind of just be participant to. So a refusal to engage with the world in any sort of way. So it becomes really difficult at that point of time. So maybe there is some sort of relief, reprieve that can be had from psychiatric medication. So I'm just saying, to me, all options on the table, full-on engagement, not actually having some sort of like, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. It makes no sense to me right now, the place that we are at. And I just want to kind of flag a couple of things which are contentious, but it's very nice to say that, like, let's engage, let's move from management to engagement. But when you're talking about something that you have to do day in, day out, week after week, month after month, year after year, engagement is a very dangerous and very difficult, time-consuming, energy-consuming process. I thought I had, all the psychological resources in the world to do this, and after a year of it, I can see that, I'm hanging in there, but barely, and it's not easy. So the couple of things that are kind of related to this. One, I want to kind of, I see with the MHC, the mental health care bill that's up there, and the mostly upbeat sort of feeling about it. I know it mentions community and it mentions family, but somewhat cursorily, but it does mention it. I do think that community in some way is, along with this narrative restructuring, is key to mental well-being. I don't think a person can be well when the community around them is not supportive, because your closest relationships, intimacy and vulnerability are completely tied in. Intimacy can lead to the greatest harm, but it's also the greatest support. It's a double-edged sword, So I don't think we can just kind of jettison that, and that's something that we have to look at. And state provision of mental health services is all well and good, but it is not a replacement for community support. And to me, the evisceration of communities that we're seeing around us, in my own experience, and I mean just the experience of having been in the psychiatric ward for the last 5 weeks, I can just name the number of kids who have come there with mania and psychosis caused by drug abuse, who are coming from the hinterland of NCR region because their families have come into money through the kind of real estate boom that's happened. So capitalism meets drugs, meets psychosis. It's all there. Or so we have to really look at the community angle of it and pay attention to that. The other thing is that it's really, as I was saying, that resentment, hatred, when you talk about engagement, to engage with resentment and hatred and violence on a daily basis is not a pleasant thing. It's a very, very difficult thing. And to have the gumption for it is I don't think any one person can do this on their own. That is why even for caregivers, the necessity of a communal support system is absolutely critical. I don't think state services or just like having psychologists or psychiatrists can replace that. It just doesn't work. I think we're recreating a Western model and kind of losing something that works in some ways already here. Because if you're familiar with the famous WHO study, Asian countries have better prognosis for, in the case of at least mental illness, than Western countries, even though they have better facilities, precisely because of the camaraderie and social support that is available for people here. You don't become homeless here overnight, no matter what happens. That's one thing. And just adding on to that, I know this is perhaps the most contentious thing that I will say, but I've had to involuntarily admit my brother 5 weeks ago. The memory of forcibly taking him to the hospital is, etched absolutely clearly in my head. But I think we also we do a little bit of a wishy-washy job when we talk about difficult things like violence. It's very easy to again have a moral certitude about violence, that it's always bad in all circumstances, and generally it's good to be wary of violence. I'm not advocating being trigger happy or just jumping on people and taking them away, but violence, I think, if you look at it, is symptomatic of a breakdown of communication. So violence causes the breakdown of communication, and violence is also response, the kind of basic crude language which indicates that communication has broken down. So how do we actually negotiate violence, especially when it comes to your near and dear ones? And in my case, it was never that my brother was explicitly violent towards me or anyone else, but having been violent towards him, I do see that it's something that something to kind of think about. That sometimes violence is a way of is in itself an attempt to reach out to somebody who is beyond reaching out. Yeah. So yeah, I'll just keep things there, and we can take it from there. Yeah. Thank you.
The facilitation that you created for us was to bring us into a community mode. Your smile and your tentativeness to sort of say difficult things was the best that allowed us to actually, at least in this moment, become a part of the experience that you are living by yourself. And my sense is that we'll sort of develop it more.
Yeah,
So time permits, but even if the time doesn't permit, the despair that you bring in, there are directions to attend to them with matching difficulty. Difficulty would not be lessened, but as you are saying, the difficulty can be both with a smile, the sense of coming across to each other, in the sense of a very, very implausible situation. Thank you. काफी curiosity आ रही है.
Okay, let me orient myself to the topic and the theme of the day to start with. Because when it came to me, suffering, surviving and living, and particularly today's topic of learning from the voice of suffering and dilemmas in listening and caring, it blew my mind. I did not know. It doesn't matter if it is on or not. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So yeah, I thought everything, all this is going to go right above my head, and I'm trying to make head or tail of what's going to happen in today's seminar. But clearly, what both of you presented has been really engaging. However, the question that's coming to my mind, and I'm a little worried about it, is that will I be able to actually hold a counterpoint? Because if that's what you're looking for, you've got the wrong guy.
Be the counterpoint as effectively as you can. When you collapse, you'll be there.
So, just to share with you that while I was going through my education of being in Limans, one of those, and then subsequently I decided that that's not going to be enough, and I needed to do something to work with children. I realized as I started working is that a lot of those kids that I see are not exactly, I mean, can't be exactly, but they are so similar to the way I used to be as a child. And then of course I realized that I had ADHD, or I have ADHD, self-diagnosed of course, yeah. But there's no question about it. I remembered stories, and my mother will happily, speak hours about how she had to tie me with her, to study. And sometimes when she had to go away, she had to, tie me against, with the leg of the dining table. And the moment I had the door open, within seconds I was out, and I would, to cut short the journey, I would roll down the steps, then get up and start running again, And then my struggles through school and college with academics, with submissions, with the focus and everything, and it was all there. So. In some ways, although not maybe just as painful as you have described, we are pretty much in the same boat. So there you go. To be able to hold a semblance of a counterpoint, I thought I might help you to take to imagine. Let's say a child who's going to school. Let's call him Sahil. So Sahil is going to school, and Sahil's temperament is timid, right? And as we often have timid kids, and we also have boisterous kids. And if you don't do anything about it, often you find that the boisterous kids end up doing things, teasing and doing things to these timid kids, which would amount to bullying, let's say. So Sahil starts getting bullied, right? And Sahil starts getting bullied, and he doesn't know how to handle it. After a lot of thinking through it and dilemmas as to whether this is going to make him look like a weak child, etc., he does decide to say it to his mother. His mother responds immediately, listens deeply, and understands the pain and the anguish that her child is going through. Because, somebody else might turn around and say, what's the big deal? You're using lots of names, come on, grow up, deal with it, right? But Sahil's mother in this instance did not do that. She listened and tried to empathize as much as she could with her child, and took the matter to the school management and teachers. And they responded. They responded by actually acknowledging that indeed this could happen in our school, it could happen in any school, and they need to do something about it. So they rallied around, they went around and spoke with the teachers, they spoke to some of the kids, sensitized them, etc. And helped Sahil to settle again, settle emotionally, settle socially. And so Sahil grew up, as he grew up over there, feeling that indeed there are people who are looking out for him. He grew up feeling a sense of self-worth, a sense of belonging. And as he came out of school, a lot of things had got left behind. Was there suffering? I would of course ask you the question, do you think there was suffering here? Was there suffering? Of course there was suffering. Sahil suffered when he got bullied. Maybe when the other boisterous kids were told about how they behaved, etc., and were asked to look within, did they suffer? Perhaps they did. Or when the rest of the community, the other parents were brought in, teachers who were perhaps traditional, were asked to look within and reflect on these things, did they? Perhaps they did. But as they did, they also learned. They introspected, they learned. And what happened at the end of it is that they formed a community. Yeah? And they formed a community where they were able to actually see the differences in children, support each other, there was sensitivity, there was compassion. Now that could be one very idealistic outcome of Sahil, right? Think of another trajectory, another pathway. In this case, Sahil again dilly-dallied and did not want to tell anybody because he thought that nobody would be able to understand what he was going through, but eventually did. And he went and talked to his parents, and his parents said, "My God, how can you even take it? I mean, if somebody's saying this to you, say it right back. Hit back, come on. I mean, you can't just, I mean, are you a boy or a girl? Right?" And so Sahil did.
You can't be that much of a bully.
and so Sahil did, but he failed, right? And when he failed, he actually became more of a victim, and then started getting bullied more. But when he went and reported, or if they got it in his face, his father would turn around and say, "Are you fix it kya?" So he started becoming completely cagey and guarded about it, and would not actually talk about it at home at all, right? But what he started doing instead was forming worldviews, and also started looking for opportunities where he would be able to give vent to his frustrations and anger. So obviously, like as you might all know, that bullied often turn bullies, and that's what he started doing. And as he started, left school, he came out with the view that the world is not a safe place. There are people who are out to get you, and you better look after your backside, otherwise you're going to have it in life. So still later, once he got married, he would bully his wife, sometimes may have, given to domestic violence, and treated his children in a certain way, right? Is there suffering here? There is huge suffering. Multiplied suffering. Does it reach the psychiatrist or the psychologist? No. And there must be huge sections of society who, week after week, month after month, and generation after generation, live through this, through hierarchies, through patriarchies, and are, transferring these kind of feelings and worldviews to their children, to their peers, to their students, and that's how it moves on. The third trajectory is when this child gets treated like Sahil at home, but instead of becoming a bully, begins to internalize all the anger and aggression. And by the time he's into his teenage years, he's becoming clinically depressed. So his moods are swinging, his grades are falling, he's refusing to go to school, and then he starts self-harming, and then goes on to make a very serious suicidal attempt. That's when the mental health juggernaut gets in, right? So it gets in because through DSMs and ICDs and diagnoses and medication and whatnot, right? And he gets institutionalized for some time, and then he goes in and out, and it again depends so much as to how these things will get handled and into which place, whether it's a enhance or an enhance, or how the community responds to that. Where will he or other people around him get the resources, as you said, to be able to heal him? All that will matter in terms of what the outcome will be. So, indeed, there are resources, and at this, I'm certain, having worked with kids, particularly kids like these for a few years now, that these are not chance happenings. These trajectories happen because you make choices, that you draw on resources, that you have belief and you have hope. and therefore you are able to do that. And the big question is, which part of these three trajectories should we focus on? As mental health professional, are we going to say that if things are working out fine on the surface, we should just leave it be? So the first Sahil pathway and the second Sahil pathway, should we be concerned about it at all? Or should we be just concerned about the one who are depressed? Yeah? And if we did, then in what way, right? Does psychiatry have a role? Does medicines have a role at all? Yeah? If you ask me, do I practice psychiatry? Of course I do. Do I write medication? I do sometimes. Not happily all the time, but I do. And I see sometimes that when people go through phases like this, they go through periods where they might need the support of some of that to be able to access the other resources that all of you have been talking about. Just as you did,
Yes,
I think. Yeah. So the first few years that you had, you thought you had to take medicine because you wanted to stabilize yourself, were years where you might have had to, maybe your system needed it at that time, right? But as you drew upon the internal resources and the external resources, the necessity of those kind of interventions probably reduced. And I think that delicate balance as to where you want the psychiatric interventions or the more so-called scientific evidence-based interventions to come in, yeah, is something that is a very delicate balance, and that could make or break a person's life, I think. Of course, the decisions are often joint, and decisions are made by the individual, the family. A lot of the times in our kind of setup, it is made by the family. Indeed, there's no question that once you get into the third trajectory of where Sahil reached with his depression, or bipolar disorder, or even ADHD for that matter, a lot of your choices reduce. Yeah, your freedom is taken away of you, and human rights and all that definitely gets jeopardized. And most importantly, I think human dignity gets jeopardized and lost. And so these are the kind of things that could happen if we don't deal with a third, sort of pathway sensitively. And that's from where we could probably take the discussion forward if you have questions about it. If somebody wants to get
Dr. Nagpal, am I allowed to pitch in something over here? Perhaps it's not appropriate, but I would like to share the case of a Sahil who met me like this, And he was a boy who exactly faced the bullying situation in school, and his story is a part of my book. And so what happened in school was that he was in class 9, and there was this bully in school who would say that exam mein mujhe cheat karna hai, because you have to show me whatever you are writing in your paper, I'll copy it from you. And this boy's father was a teacher at the same school. So this boy, as in Sahil, my Sahil's father, who was a teacher in the school, he couldn't tell anybody that I'm being bullied by so and so. So he said, agar tune mujhe dikhaya nahi exam mein, I'm going to get you. So dhamki de di usko. And he would keep on nagging him, bullying him here and there, whatever it is. After that, sometime after that, Sahil became so obsessed with the whole threat of the bullying, he started believing that I could be hit, I could be harmed. And he internalizes to the extent that now he starts living in that world of death, and oh God, I can be hurt, I can be got at, and so on and so forth. So what happens, the boy is unable to take his class 12 exam. And so I asked him that, how is it possible? Was he still there with you, that boy who was bullying you? He said, no, Didi, that boy left after the class 9 because he failed in the exam. But that fear came into me so much that I started living with the fear. It became very huge in my mind. And then I couldn't do my exam. I said, what after that? Phir kya kiya? Then he said that I took a year off, and then after that I did my exams. And then I went into some kind of a course in aeronautical engineering somewhere in Punjab. And after that, he came back home, but I think he had a psychosis after that. And psychosis, he was back home to his home in Uttar Pradesh, wherever UP. And then again he started living in that world where the fear of death is now haunting him. So he was given first a diagnosis of perhaps OCD, and then he was on medication for that, and it was an Awaaz only. And then again, then it became bipolar, then multiple diagnoses and so on. So by the time I met Sahil, he was 35 years old. And his problem had started when he was in class 9th, and then he started getting medication from class perhaps 10th or 12th onwards. And when I meet him, this is my first encounter, and he says that, Didi, I said, he said, this is the first time I'm having this kind of a communication with anybody, because nobody ever asked me anything. You know, he पूछा ही नहीं कैसे हुआ. And after that, I was walking with him because he came to my home. He was the only person who came to my home to talk to me. And I said, so we were walking down to the bus stop. I was seeing him off, and I said, so he said, Didi, हिंदी में ज़रूर करना किताब को. एक तो उसने बोला मुझे, और दूसरा कहा कि I am very happy to meet you. I am so, and this boy, in the morning that he had to come from, let's say, Meerut, he had to take morning bus to reach my house. It was February, I remember. Thand ka mausam hai, depression is always a little higher in the winter season. So he said, he called up in the morning to say, I don't think I can come, Didi. I said, look, Beta, if you're not coming, it's a loss to us and to both of us actually. So it's your choice. I can't force you. It's a voluntary thing. And I was of course very scared that if this volunteer falls off, now how do I get the next volunteer to participate in my study? So I have my anxiety. He has his own thing. He has to come to Faridabad from Meerut, which means so many buses, And but anyway, so he finally takes heart. He takes courage from the fact that there's someone who's so supportive. And at least I'd like to believe that I was supportive, maybe. But he took the courage, despite whatever shakiness he was feeling in the morning. At 9 o'clock, he reached my home at about 12:31. He spent some 4-5 hours with me, discussed the story, and and he went back and he said that I also really want to be like you. I said, wow, this is beautiful, because I don't need to get anybody's medal here, but if it's a little ray of hope. And he, of course, my door opener has been, in my own life, my research door opener has been my story, which is a publication which perhaps has been shared within the group here also. And it's publicly available, you can all read it. It's published in a journal in psychology. So that became a door opener because people saw that I was pretty badly off myself. And whatever Anmol was saying about his brother, I've pretty much been there, So to see me today like this is a very long leap I've made, and it's been a very slow process. So what I'm saying is that resources are there, and Sahil comes to my house and he goes back with the hope that I can also recover. So we periodically keep in touch. My engagement with people, even my research participants, is not a research thing, because we are like kindred souls. We are talking constantly. I'm touching base, or bhai kya haal chal raha hai? But jokingly I'll ask something like that. So this is also a possibility which happened. I saw it.
In fact, I was very glad to see that the applause due to Abhijit comes in a very different way. You said that psychiatry didn't help you, but it made you remember your son.
Absolutely.
Let's have an applause for Amit, because like I said, a good footballer that he has been, he managed to bring back psychiatry right in the center. Saying all three trajectories are touched by it, and they might, for all we know, be refurbished by it. Thank you.
I think, can you hear me at the back?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you dispense with it. Before I start, actually, I have a question for Anmol. And the question is, why did you involuntarily have to, commit your brother involuntarily?
So after a long process of kind of trying to engage with him, trying to see what he wanted to do for his wellness, just get involved in anything, and seeing that wasn't working, and after, I don't know whether he'll be okay with me sharing this, but he basically was losing his ability to speak and communicate in anything, which is to say via signs, via anything, and was getting more and more aloof, which was basically a positive feedback cycle, which I saw happening over maybe 7-8 months of me being there all the time. And then I made a call that being the person who's closest to him and who knows him the best, that I could see that there was some sort of, he was frustrated, something was bothering him, and he had been compliant with medicine and that had never happened before. So I had to bring that option to him. I couldn't just be like, look, I'm like a human rights guy, I don't like this forcible thing. I had to make that option open to him. And as I was saying, that when communication has broken down in some sort of way, that sometimes one has to take a violent step, and I took that violent step to kind of come back in engagement with him. And that is the reason for the involuntary remission. Yeah. I mean, there's no kind of, I can't give the magic word, but it's like an instinctual thought, at the end of the day, yeah.
I know this is supposed to be about law, but I have to tell you that I'm at war within myself. So there's a lawyer and there is also the activist, and the both of them sometimes talk very different languages, and therefore there is a lot of dichotomy, there's a lot of cacophony that goes on. So I think that probably is going to come true. Yeah. So I'm going to start actually not with law. I'm going to start with 20 years ago, my father was hospitalized and he was critical. And my sister was in the process of her examinations. She was, she just gotten into, she had to go through a batch of 4, and he was taken ill on the day of her first examination. And I and my mother took a considered decision. We said, we will not tell her about this condition unless it deteriorates further till such time as her exams are over. Yeah? And this was a withholding of information. We made a decision that was, according to us, for her good. We were looking at it totally from her perspective. But do you think she was grateful? Not at all. When she found out, which incidentally was after her 4th exam, she tore strips of us. She was furious. She said, this was not your choice to make, this was mine. And yes, in some way I get that it was not our choice to make, probably it was her choice to make. But in some way I've never been able to reconcile that it wasn't my choice to make. And in a heartbeat, I think if I had to do it again, I probably would make the same choice that I made 20 years ago. I would not tell her. So my point is that every day in our lives, we deal with situations where we transplant our judgment for the judgment of other people, for their own good. And quite a lot of the times, it's actually okay. It's actually okay because that's a part of the human interaction that goes on back and forth. I supplant my judgment for my husband in a very small way. When he's leaving the home, he says, oh, I don't think I require food, and I just put a tiffin carrier in the back of his car, saying if he wants it, he can have it. If he doesn't want it, he won't have it. It's still a nuisance for him to carry. So the point is that we make these judgments. We also have interactions about them, right? But when it comes down to particularized kind of situations, like it happened with Anmol, he's having a lot of problems with substituting his own judgment for someone else's. And that is a problem. It is a huge problem because when we look at it in a certain paradigm, when we look at it in terms of our class of people for whom we take away legal capacity and we continually supplant decision making, we do not support it, we do not try and find out what they want, it becomes a problem. So that's one part of the discourse. The other part of the discourse is about violence. And at the very fulcrum of violence is law. Unfortunately, I think most of us don't recognize that completely inherent in the concept of law is violence. It is fundamental and central to law to be violent. Why? Because in the enforcement of law, it's always a prevention. So it's a prevention of somebody doing something, and every day we justify and we rationalize to ourselves why this violence. I mean, actually we've reached a point where we do not even, really speaking, under normal everyday circumstances, justify to ourselves why we would incarcerate a petty thief, or why we would give the rape accused in the Nirbhaya case death penalty, or incarcerate them for life. I'm sure these are discussions we have all the time. And the question would then be, every human being has a right to, if we look at the Universal Declaration of Man, of human rights, every human being has a right to be free. They're born free, they have a right to be free. And the minute you deny them that right to be free, you take away a human right that is completely fundamental. And laws everywhere in the world, all over, do this. Even a simple, ordinary thing like a law of contract says what you can do and what you can't do. Right? So it's a denial, and therefore inherent in it is a certain kind of violence. Whether we recognize it or not is a different issue. So, now if we look at law in the paradigm of mental health, before we start even looking at law in the paradigm of mental health, when we look at the Mental Health Act, which was supposed to be a huge improvement on the Indian Lunacy Act, we need to go back to how actually we felt the need for a law on mental health. And the need for a law on mental health actually goes back to the fundamental roots of society. Society has traditionally always shut away people who are considered dangerous and difficult for society to deal with. So we've locked away people who have interfered with our well-being in terms of criminality. Whether it's assaults on life, on liberty, on whatever. We've locked away people. Then when society became a little more evolved, we started to lock away people who were actually committing assaults on our economic structure. It's very interesting to note that initially, the debtors' prison in the UK came about much later. Initially, we only locked away people who assaulted us in terms of our person, or who assaulted us in terms of our power structures. So we fought wars, one country against the other. Yeah? And then we also started to lock away people who were disturbing to us in terms of making us uncomfortable. And these were people with mental health issues. And I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but it's not really quite so surprising when we look at the history of mental asylums and where they started from. Most mental asylums across the board, across the world, started from prisons. They were all old prison buildings. They got converted. You took a person you thought was, you pushed them in and you locked them away. And the reason for this is because there is a certain evolution that happens in society, and the evolution in law happens alongside of it. So the evolution of society as we were going along, more and more impacts we were realizing were coming in, and as a result, we had to take action, we had to protect ourselves, lock away people. And that came about because of a generic understanding of how we have to approach human beings. It's very closely tied up to the entire concept of the evolving nature of the discourse on disability. Yeah? So, initially, for example, we had a person with mental retardation, or somebody who was not even mentally challenged, but perhaps only developmentally delayed, you know. So what did we do? We just took them away, we locked them in a room, we said they were an idiot, and let's keep the idiot away because this idiot impacts me as my child or as my whatever, as in a relationship to me. Lock the idiot away. You lock the idiot away, stays in a room, doesn't get any inputs whatsoever, so the idiot becomes more of an idiot. And the entire process becomes a vicious cycle. So then you suddenly progress from that and you start looking at people individually. This is actually the stage at which we are now. So we do need to understand that the Mental Health Act, the Indian Lunacy Act are in a paradigm where we were making generalizations. And because of those generalizations, the law also made a generalization. It said this is a norm. You fit this norm, very good. If you don't, we'll incarcerate. And if you look at the Mental Health Act, you realize that actually the Mental Health Act does not have any discourse on rehabilitation. It doesn't have any, actually it doesn't deal with people outside of an institutional setting. It's completely institutional based. And the only people outside of an institutional setting that it really touches are the mentally ill, destitute on the streets, and that also in the paradigm of how will we institutionalize them? Yeah? So that's really the paradigm from where your Mental Health Act comes. And then you have some further evolution, and today we are standing at a point where we are in the middle of trying to process the mental health care bill. And I don't know how many of you are aware. It's a good document. Of course, there are people who say there's so much that's missing. We have to completely do away with involuntary incarceration. There are other voices that say that it's too much laissez-faire, there is too much emphasis on legal capacity. Actually, there should not be so much legal capacity. There are people who say there is not enough emphasis on the medical aspect of mental health. There are people who say there is insufficient emphasis on the social restructuring and rehabilitation and so on. The reason for that is because the mental health care bill has to look at all stakeholders. And when we say all stakeholders, I want to share something with you. This is a friend of mine, as I was growing up, was diagnosed with a bipolar disorder. He's an extremely creative guy. He's absolutely amazing, actually. I'm not going to reveal the name because probably a lot of you have heard of him. Anyway, to cut a long story short, his whole the entire dialogue, as I remember it, was that this guy did not want to go on to medication because he said when he did go on to the medication, it flattened him out. And therefore, his creative phase, which was his manic phase, got taken away. And he said, for that creativity and for that phase, I'm willing to put up with anything. I don't want medication. Now that was one part of it. The other part of it was his parents. His parents said, we have looked after, we have supported, he can be a danger to himself, to society, property. We have tried our level best. We are now getting old, we are tired, and we also need some accommodation. He needs to go on to medication simply because we need to have a respite. And these were the paradigms that were constantly rolling in. So it was the who do you listen to? Which voice do you look at? And the mental health care bill also has to actually work with, when the national concentration happened, they happened with all these stakeholders. They happened with the caregivers, they happened with the user survivors, they happened with the psychiatrists, with the psychologists, the lawyers, everybody. And so, at the moment, this is just a flux. This is not the end of it. Law is an evolving concept. It's something which we go along and we find this doesn't work, that doesn't work. Of course it's difficult because law, it's difficult to change once you get it into place. So you try to be as careful as possible, but it's not written in stone. And therefore, there are a lot of things which are very good about the mental health care bill. As compared to the Mental Health Act, of course, it's paradise. There's no question about it. But of course, there are other things that we feel or wish for or want, and we haven't been able to get in. I know that I haven't shared with you, probably should have gone down the Mental Health Act and the Mental Health Care Bill. I don't think I'm within time, so I'm not going to do it. But if you have any questions, even after the seminar, you can go back and read the acts or some commentaries in the acts, and you can just get back to me if you have questions. And if you have any questions now, I'd be happy to field them.